Hello, my name is Lisa Hammer. I'm a doctoral student at Liberty University, pursuing my industrial organizational psychology doctorate. Currently a student in Psychology 855, Contemporary and Virtual Organizations. And today I want to talk about effective communication in virtual teams. This presentation will cover what team communication looks like, the effect of the pandemic on team communication, the differences between traditional and virtual teams, leadership and communication, challenges with team communication, ways to mitigate those challenges, and effective communication through a biblical worldview. What does communication in teams look like? There are two types of team communications. One is more relationally oriented. These are very valuable for globally dispersed teams where you have intercultural communications. This decreases uncertainty and increases cohesion and also improves team culture. One study that I looked at talked about how important it was to have that first interaction be something more personal than task related so that people can connect through their relationships. And the second type of communication is task oriented. This is related to achieving team goals and objectives, and it's very important for the team leaders and for team members to understand their role clarity and task distribution. Studies indicate that virtual teams provide better results when communication strategies are effective. The COVID-19 pandemic created a worldwide crisis on many fronts. Within businesses, organizations were unprepared for trying to meet organizational goals with employees who may not be able to come into the office. This also created isolation of employees. I know in my own organization, our office had frequently worked remotely. However, most organizations within my agency had not. So they were forced to suddenly move from a traditional team to a virtual team, picking up technologies, picking up communication skills along the way. Within this pandemic period, there was a creation of something called hybrid work environment. This was a mix of traditional and virtual teams. As Veda-Menescu et al. Discusses, the Microsoft 2021 Work Trend Index annual report says that hybrid work is the, quote, next great disruption. This furthers the challenges that were created by the pandemic, as leaders must have more human-centric style of leadership, focusing on different strategies to cope with team dynamics of people working from home versus working in the office. In addition, this sped up the need for remote working, which creates new challenges in and of itself. Suddenly, teams find themselves virtual. They're challenged by distractions at home, with the work-life balance. And so this not only focused on those challenges of just the individual, but how they could use communication effectively. First, let's talk a little about the differences between traditional and virtual teams, and the differences between the team structure and how they operate also influence the type of communication that you would use. Virtual teams and traditional teams may look similar, but there are differences and challenges. A high-functioning team in general understands their common goals. They include all team members and activities, and they use good communication methods to ensure understanding within the team. So with both types of teams, that's very imperative to do. You can decrease team performance through those same difficulties that can occur with traditional or virtual teamwork. Being disconnected with team members, having poor communication, those can exacerbate those challenges. Within the traditional teams, most of those are in office. They may work on occasion, they may be part hybrid, but for the most part, they're in the office. And leadership is key for them. Interactions are primarily face-to-face with their team leaders or their supervisors. These influence individual attitudes and behaviors. Technology is secondary within the traditional team world. They use it for emails and presentations and working on shared projects, but it is just a secondary tool that is used in conjunction with face-to-face work. In contrast to traditional teams, virtual teams are low cost. You have no office space, no travel expenses. You can work anytime, anywhere, whether it's at the beach or in your house. You may be working with global people, global team members from around the world, so therefore the anytime, anywhere actually works well. Language barriers can present a problem, so language skills are very important in virtual teams, and this can, especially with global teams. And you also, with working with global team members, have people who have different personal values. You have near immediate connectivity with team members through technology, and your technology is used for the primary means of communication, in contrast with that of traditional teams. A study by Vatamescu et al. Found that the effectiveness of leader communication strategy strongly influences team culture. They also found that leader communication skills can inspire and support team members when accomplishing a task. This provides for a team environment where everyone is working toward a common goal and a shared investment in the task. This is even more important in a virtual team because face-to-face interactions do not occur or they are distorted through technological methods. So what does a good leader need as far as communication skills? Well, they need to be able to communicate efficiently. Establishing work processes at the beginning of the task and communicating throughout that task will help keep those conflicts reduced. In addition, they also need to understand the technologies that are available to communicate through. As new technologies are developed, leaders will need to further their communication skills. Leaders need to encourage good communication. This is participative, transparent, and encourages engagement and trust between the team members. It's deliberate, it focuses on relational oriented that we just spoke about in the last slide, instead of on strictly the task completion. Leadership that is focused strictly on task completion doesn't seem to achieve the same results as leaders who are relationally focused. There are multiple challenges with team communication, especially with virtual teams. Things such as technology, leader communication, remote work, and multicultural teams, just name a few. Regarding technology, with the move to more virtual teams, those socio-emotional cues that are suitable for communication in face-to-face settings can be challenging in an online work environment. You can't see the body language as well, or you can't get those emotional cues that you could, the nonverbal ones that you can mainly through the traditional face-to-face meetings. These can exacerbate misunderstandings and conflicts that may be present for other reasons. We've talked about what's important for leader communication, but really the perceptions that team members have of their leader's ability to make the most of the various methods of communication also influence those same team members' perception of how well the team is performing in general. So in other words, if team members view their leaders as being effective with communication, they're more likely to see their team's performance as effective as well. We talked about virtual teams in pandemic and the push toward remote work. But the challenges with remote work are not only those work-home disruptions, but there's loneliness and the ineffective communication from team members and leaders can make this worse. The level of autonomy that's given to virtual team members, the workload they have, obviously moderated by their self-discipline, all of these can be either positive or negative factors in how team members are able to do their work. Finally, multicultural teams obviously are virtual, these globally dispersed teams, and they provide a challenge just by the fact that they are multicultural. Language barriers can create misunderstandings and conflicts. Communication norms can differ across cultures. Different rules of politeness, directness, and knowledge exchanges. For example, in Israel, meaning would be conveyed directly. However, if you were to be direct with someone from East Asia, that would be considered rude or possibly offensive. These cultural differences extend also to the perceptions of teamwork. If team members believe that they are safe, psychologically safe, to express their thoughts without consequence, then these differences with multicultural teams can be resolved easier. There are several communication challenges related to virtual teams. One of those has to do with diversity. Diversity is very important in any team. Research has shown that diversity improves creativity and performance, but it can also negatively impact the communication at all levels within the team if individuals choose to communicate solely with others like them. Studies have shown that fault lines can develop within teams. These fault lines are hypothetical lines or boundaries that divide teams into uniform subgroups based on individual attributes such as age or gender or culture. These subgroups can create conflicts within teams. In larger teams, these subgroups can form that affect the team as a whole because you have multiple subgroups who are communicating within those subgroups and not to the overall team. Obviously, language barriers can present problems in communication and lead to breakdowns in confidence as well as frustration and isolation of team members. When choosing communication methods, the language skills of team members should be considered. For example, less capable team members may prefer text communication, such as email, so that they can reread and rethink what they're reading through. And finally, affect management can be a challenge. When emotions cannot be regulated or controlled, this can affect the team as a whole. Affect management is defined as the process used by the team to manage those team members' emotions. This can be through boosting morale, being empathetic, and calming members down. These unregulated emotions can reduce team cohesion and team commitment. A recent study related to affect management sought to design communication strategies that could be used as an intervention in computer-related communications. These included the timing of the message, which can prevent delays in response and mitigate any kind of relationship issues between team members. And it also, interestingly enough, included the use of emoticons, those little smiley faces or sad faces that we see all the time. These can be used to soften negative messages or requests that might be interpreted as forceful, and they can also be used to strengthen positive messages as well. How do we mitigate these communication challenges? One way is through technology and face-to-face interactions. Virtual teams obviously use technology as their primary way to communicate, so live chats, instant messaging, phone calls are all readily available to them to be able to use, and they provide for quick information sharing and response. But in addition, when face-to-face interactions are not available in person, then the next best thing would be a video call or online conferencing. You can, to some extent, see those nonverbal cues. It may not be the body language or anything that you would if you were seeing someone in person, but you can pick up on those nonverbal cues that is usually used in traditional teams. So this can be something that mitigate any kind of challenges that are out there. Another thing is when you're coming onto a team sharing personal information. Those relational-oriented types of communication seem to be very useful, according to research, in establishing rapport with team members when it is focused on the personal instead of task-oriented. When personal information isn't shared, team members may revert to stereotyping and having bias. And we talked about the diversity factor earlier, how diversity, while good, can sometimes be used by people to establish fault lines and boundaries so that they will be with people like themselves. The incompatibilities that they see with other team members are usually more focused on the personal attributes and don't necessarily relate to the task related attributes, but obviously create that conflict and tension. Affect management, even using the emoticons, can help reduce this conflict by limiting formation of the subgroups and the associated biases. When I think of effective communication in general through a biblical worldview, I think of Jesus' parables, and I've provided three here. Matthew 13:35 says, "Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him, saying, 'Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field.'" In Matthew 18:21 through 23, "Then Peter came up and said to him, 'Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him?' Jesus said to him, 'Therefore the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants.'" Then again in Luke 12:16 he says, "And he told him a parable, saying, 'The land of a rich man produced plentifully.'" This says to me that Jesus was willing to change his method of communication depending on who he was talking to. And so he used parables to be able to do that. He told stories that would be able to be understood by people who heard them, whether it be farmers or the Pharisees, anyone like that. They could understand it because he put it in such plain language that he painted a picture. And I think that's what we need to do as Christians when we're dealing with virtual teams, global team members, traditional teams, anyone that we deal with. I think we need to be able to use every method possible and be able to reach them so that we can communicate in a way that they can understand, whether that's through email, whether that's through video conferencing, whether it's through a chat feature, however the case may be. Using every method and being able to meet that person where they are within their understanding of the communication that you're giving, just like Jesus did with the parables.